man marries an obese woman, sir. But I can cook, said the mail-order bride. The rancher's reply changed her life. Winter 1882. A mail-order bride steps off the train in Cheyenne. Her groom takes one look at her body and leaves her standing in the snow. No explanation, no apology. Just gone. No man marries an obese woman, sir, she whispered to the rancher, who found her shivering on that platform. But I can cook. Most men would have walked away. Hell, one already had. But Garrett Stone wasn't most men. What he said in that moment, 7 words that cost him nothing and gave her everything, became the foundation of a love story the territory would talk about for 50 years. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do isn't draw his gun. It's choose the woman everyone else overlooked. She cried for exactly 4 minutes. That's all Martha Brennan allowed herself after the man she'd crossed half a country to marry took one look at her body, muttered Christ under his breath, and rode away like she carried plague. 4 minutes, sitting on that bench outside Cheyenne Station, hands folded in her lap, head down, shoulders shaking, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep inside you didn't even know it existed until shame cracked you open and dragged it out. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her spine, and decided she'd rather starve with dignity than beg for crumbs of affection from men who measured worth in inches. The station was nearly empty now. Most folks had cleared out when the train pulled away, leaving behind nothing but wheel ruts in the snow and the ghost of steam still hanging in the frozen air. The wind cut across the platform like a knife. Martha pulled her thin shawl tighter, but it didn't help. Nothing helped. She'd sold everything she owned to come here. Her mother's china, her father's pocket watch, the quilt her grandmother made, $17.32. That's what her entire life had been worth. And she'd spent 16 of it on a train ticket to marry a man named Thomas Carver, who'd promised her a home, a future, and a chance to be something other than the fat girl everyone pitied. He'd lied, not about the home, not about the future. He'd lied about wanting her. The letter crumpled in her coat pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She didn't need to read it again. She'd memorized every word. Upon seeing you in person, I find you have gravely misrepresented your appearance. Our arrangement is void. Do not contact me again. Gravely misrepresented. Like she'd committed fraud. Like being fat was a crime. Martha stared at the snow gathering on her boots and wondered how long it would take to freeze to death. Hours probably, maybe less if the wind picked up. Part of her didn't care. Part of her was so tired of fighting, so tired of smiling through insults and pretending she didn't hear the whispers. That freezing seemed almost peaceful. That's when she heard the boots, heavy, steady, crunching through snow. She didn't look up, didn't have the energy. Just kept staring at her hands, red and raw from the cold. The boots stopped in front of her. Can you cook? The voice was low, rough, not unkind, but not gentle either. The voice of a man who didn't waste words. Martha looked up slowly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wore a long coat dusted with trail snow, and a hat pulled low over eyes that were the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered, carved by wind and sun and years of hard living. There was a scar above his left eyebrow. His hands, resting on his belt, were calloused and scarred. He looked like Wyoming felt, harsh, unyielding, real. I said, "Can you cook?" Martha swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. "I can," she whispered, "for 20 men." Her breath caught. 20. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Not with cruelty, not with pity. Just looking, seeing. "I run a ranch west of here. Lost my cook 3 days ago, sick. Men are hungry and useless when unfed. I heard you came here to work. So I'm asking, can you cook for 20 men? Martha's hands trembled in her lap. She looked past him, toward the empty tracks, the frozen plains, the life she'd imagined disappearing like smoke. Then she looked back at him. No man marries an obese woman. "Sir," she said, voice barely holding together, "but I can cook." The words hung in the air between them, raw and trembling. She expected him to turn away, to offer a curt apology or a dismissive laugh. Expected him to do what everyone else did, see her body and stop seeing her. But Garrett Stone didn't move. He looked at her. Not through her, not past her. At her. Then he said softly, "I'm not hiring a wife, Miss Brennan. I'm hiring someone who knows how to feed a man in a way that reminds him life's still worth waking up for." Martha blinked. Her vision blurred. She couldn't tell if it was tears or cold or something else entirely. Garrett crouched down slowly, bringing himself eye level with her. His face was serious, steady. "I don't need beautiful," he said. "I need capable. Show me what you can do, and I'll show you what respect looks like." He stood, offered his gloved hand. "You coming or not?" For a long moment, Martha just stared at that hand. Rough, scarred, steady. She thought about the train that had already left, the man who'd rejected her, the life she'd never have, the shame that followed her like a shadow. Then she thought about something else. 4 minutes. That's how long she'd cried. Maybe that was enough. Martha took his hand. Garrett pulled her to her feet, then turned and started walking toward a wagon parked near the edge of the platform. She followed, legs shaking, heart pounding, clutching her carpetbag like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. He helped her into the back of the wagon, without a word, then climbed up front and took the reins. As the wagon rolled away from Cheyenne Station, Martha looked back one last time. The platform was empty now, just snow and shadows, and the fading outline of a life she'd almost lived. She turned forward. Ahead, the Wyoming plains stretched out endlessly, white and wild and terrifying. But for the first time in her life, Martha Brennan wasn't looking back. She was moving forward, toward something unknown, something uncertain, but something hers. The wagon creaked and swayed over the frozen road. Garrett drove in silence. The wind howled. The sky pressed down heavy and gray, and somewhere deep inside Martha's chest, beneath the shame and the fear and the exhaustion, something small and stubborn began to stir. Not hope. Not yet, but something close, something like the first spark. Before a fire catches, she pulled the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders and kept her eyes on the cake horizon, because Garrett Stone had said 7 words that no one had ever said to her before. "I'll show you what respect looks like." And Martha Brennan, the woman no man wanted to marry, decided she was ready to find out what that meant. The ranch appeared like a scar on the white landscape. Low buildings crouched against the wind. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray lines. Cattle huddled in corrals, their breath steaming. Everything looked hard, built to survive, not to welcome. Martha's stomach twisted as the wagon rolled closer. She could see them now, men everywhere, leaning against fence posts, mucking stalls, hauling wood. And one by one, they stopped what they were doing and turned to stare. Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop near the largest barn. Before Martha could climb down, the men started moving closer. Slowly at first, then faster. 20 of them, just like he'd said. Young and old, bearded and clean-shaven, all of them dirty, tired and curious, all of them staring at her. Martha felt the weight of those stares like stones piling on her chest. She recognized the looks, the shock that turned into judgment, the confusion that turned into mockery. "Well, hell," one man said loud enough for everyone to hear. He was tall and rail-thin with a crooked nose. "Boss brought us a cook who looks like she ate the last one." Laughter rippled through the group. Not cruel exactly, just casual. The way men laugh when they think no one important is listening. Martha's face burned. Her hands clenched around the edge of the wagon. She wanted to disappear, wanted to climb back in and beg Garrett to take her back to that empty platform where at least she'd been alone with her shame. But then Garrett stood. He didn't yell, didn't even raise his voice, just stood there in the wagon, looking at his men with those hard, unreadable eyes. The laughter died instantly. "This is Miss Brennan," Garrett said. His voice carried clear and cold across the yard. "She's your new cook. You'll treat her with respect. You'll say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. You'll keep your mouths shut unless you've got something useful to say." He paused. "Let the silence stretch, and if I hear one more comment about her appearance, that man will be riding out before supper. Understood?" No one spoke. I said, "Understood?" A chorus of low, reluctant voices. "Yes, boss." "Yes, sir." Garrett climbed down from the wagon, then turned and offered Martha his hand. She hesitated. "Just for a heartbeat." then took it. His grip was strong, steady, and he didn't let go until both her feet were firmly on the ground. "Come on," he said quietly. "I'll show you the kitchen." The kitchen was attached to the bunkhouse, a separate room with its own entrance. Inside, it smelled like burnt grease and stale coffee and something else. Neglect. Martha set down her carpetbag and looked around slowly. A massive wood-burning stove dominated one wall, its surface crusted with old spills. Shelves lined with canned goods, flour sacks and jars covered another. A long prep table sat in the center, scarred and stained. Everything was coated in dust and grease, and the kind of grime that comes from men who cook because they have to, not because they know how. "Previous cook left in a hurry," Garrett said from the doorway. "Didn't have time to clean up proper? I can see that." Martha opened a cabinet. Half the flour was full of weevils. She opened another. The salt pork was rancid. A jar of beans had gone moldy. The coffee smelled like dirt. "When's the last time anyone cooked a real meal here?" she asked. 3 days ago. Since then, the men have been living on hardtack and whatever they can scrounge. Morale's low. Tempers are high. He stepped into the room, arms crossed. "I need them fed, Miss Brennan. And I need it soon." Martha turned to face him. Her heart was still racing. Her hands were still shaking. But something else was rising up inside her now. Something stronger than fear. "I'll need fresh supplies," she said. "Clean water, firewood, and I'll need those men to stay out of my kitchen unless I call for them. Done. I'll also need time. I can't work miracles on the first night. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm asking for food that doesn't taste like saddle leather." Martha met his eyes. "Held them. I'll have supper ready by sundown," she said. "Tell your men to bring their appetites." Garrett studied her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Respect, maybe." "Yes, ma'am," he said. Then he left her alone. Martha stood in that cold, filthy kitchen and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her legs felt weak. Her chest felt tight. But she couldn't stop now. Wouldn't stop, because this was her chance. Maybe her only chance to prove she was worth something. Worth keeping. Worth more than the jokes and the stares and the man who'd ridden away without looking back. She rolled up her sleeves. First, she built a fire in the stove, fed it until the flames roared hot and angry. Then she hauled water from the pump outside, bucket after bucket, until her arms ached. She scrubbed the prep table until her knuckles were raw, threw out everything that had spoiled, organized what was left. She had 2 hours until sunset, 2 hours to make 20 hungry. Skeptical cowboys believe that the woman they'd laughed at could feed them. Better than anyone ever had. Martha pulled out the least spoiled ingredients she could find. Potatoes, onions, carrots, a slab of bacon that wasn't completely rancid. Dried beans, flour, a jar of molasses tucked in the back of a cabinet. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Her hands moved with practiced precision. Muscle memory from years in the church kitchen back in Ohio. Dice the vegetables. Render the fat from the bacon. Build the base. Layer the flavors. Let time do the work. The smell started to fill the kitchen. Rich, warm, savory. The scent of onions caramelizing, bacon crisping, beans simmering in their own thick broth. Outside, the sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the snow gold and orange. Martha wiped sweat from her forehead and kept working. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She made biscuits. Real ones, from scratch. The kind that rise high and split open with steam. Brushed them with butter and sprinkled them with coarse salt. For dessert, because she couldn't help herself, she made molasses bread pudding, warm and sweet. The kind of thing that tasted like childhood and second chances. When the dinner bell rang, Martha stepped back and looked at what she'd made. 20 plates, 20 servings, steam rising. Smells so good, they made her own stomach growl. Even though she hadn't eaten since yesterday, she heard them coming. Boots on wood, voices loud and careless. The men filed into the dining hall, shoving each other, making jokes. They grabbed their plates without looking at her, without saying thank you. Just took their food and sat down at the long tables like they were owed it. Martha stood by the stove, hands folded, watching. The first man took a bite, then stopped. His jaw slowed. His eyes widened. The second man did the same. Then the third. One by one, the noise died. The laughter faded. The bunkhouse fell silent, except for the sound of spoons scraping plates and men chewing slowly, like they were trying to make it last. No one spoke. No one joked. They just ate. Martha watched them. These rough, hard men, cowboys who'd spent their lives sleeping on the ground and eating whatever they could find. Men who'd probably never tasted anything like this, never been fed with care. One by one, they finished. And one by one, they stood and walked back to the serving table. The first man was the tall one, the one who'd made the joke about her eating the last cook. His face was red. His eyes were down. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Could I have another?" Martha took his plate, filled it again, handed it back without a word. He nodded once, didn't meet her eyes, then turned away, but as he walked back to his seat, Martha saw it, the corner of his mouth. Just barely lifting, not quite a smile. But close. Another man came. Then another. Then 5 more. All of them asking quietly, politely, some saying thank you, some just nodding. But all of them coming back. By the time the last plate was served, the sun had set completely. The stars were coming out. The wind was still howling outside. But inside that bunkhouse, something had changed. The men weren't laughing anymore, weren't making jokes. They were eating, savoring, remembering what it felt like to be cared for, and Martha Brennan, the woman no man wanted to marry, stood by the stove and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride exactly. Not yet, but something close, something like the first flicker of belonging. Garrett appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything, just stood there watching. Then he stepped inside, rolled up his sleeves, and walked over to the wash basin. "What are you doing?" Martha asked. "Dishes," he said simply. "You don't have to do that. You're the boss. I know what I am." He picked up a plate and started scrubbing. "You fed them. I'll clean after them," and that was that. They worked in silence, side by side. Garrett washing, Martha drying, the rhythm steady and easy. Outside, the stars grew brighter. Inside, the fire burned low, and for the first time since stepping off that train, Martha Brennan didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The days blurred together after that. Wake before dawn, build the fire, knead dough while the stars were still out, fry bacon, boil coffee, feed 20 hungry men before the sun crested the horizon, then clean. Prep, plan, cook lunch, cook dinner. Scrub pots until her hands cracked and bled, fall into bed exhausted, do it all again. Martha had never worked this hard in her life, but she'd also never felt this alive. The men stopped making jokes, started saying thank you. Some of them even started helping without being asked. Hauling water, chopping wood, fixing the loose hinge on the pantry door. They didn't apologize for how they'd treated her. Cowboys didn't work that way, but their actions spoke louder than words ever could. One morning, Martha found a bouquet of wild prairie grass tied with twine sitting on the prep table. No note, no name, just flowers. Another day, someone carved her a wooden spoon, rough and uneven but made with care. Little gifts started appearing. A smooth river stone, a polished button, a feather from a red-tailed hawk. The men were trying. In their own clumsy, wordless way, they were trying to say sorry. Martha kept every single gift, but it was Garrett who surprised her most. Every night after supper, without fail, he appeared in the kitchen, rolled up his sleeves, washed every dish by hand. He never asked if she needed help, never made a show of it, just did it. At first they worked in silence, but slowly, over days and then weeks, they started talking. Small things at first. The weather, the cattle, how many supplies they'd need for next week. Then deeper things. One night, while drying a cast-iron skillet, Garrett said quietly, "I was married once." Martha's hands stilled. She didn't look at him, just kept drying. Her name was Caroline. Beautiful woman, like a painting. Everyone said I was lucky. He scrubbed a plate harder than necessary. She left me after the first bad winter, said she didn't sign up for this, for the cold and the work and the loneliness, said she deserved better. He set the plate down carefully. She was right. She did deserve better. But so did I. Martha finally looked at him. His face was tired. Honest. I learned something that winter, he continued. Beauty's easy to love when the sun's shining, but it don't keep you warm when the wind's howling and the cupboards are bare. He met her eyes. You do. Martha's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say, didn't trust her voice not to break, so she just nodded, and they kept washing dishes. But something had shifted between them. Something warm and fragile and terrifying. 2 weeks later, the blizzard hit. It came without warning. One moment the sky was grey, the next the world disappeared into white chaos. Wind screamed across the plains like something alive and angry. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. Garrett and the men scrambled to get the cattle secured. Martha bolted the shutters and stoked the fire high. The storm lasted 3 days, 3 days of howling wind and darkness, 3 days of men trapped in the bunkhouse with nothing to do but eat and worry and pray the roof held. Martha cooked constantly, soups, stews, biscuits, anything to keep them fed and their spirits up. On the second night she ran out of firewood. "I'll get more," she told Garrett. "No, too dangerous. I can handle it." I said no. But Martha was already wrapping, herself in her shawl, already heading for the door. Garrett grabbed her arm. Not hard, but firm. "You go out there, you might not come back, then come with me." So he did. They stepped into the storm together. The wind hit like a fist. Snow slashed at their faces. Martha couldn't see, couldn't hear anything except the roar. Garrett grabbed her hand, pulled her close. "Stay with me," he shouted over the wind. They stumbled toward the woodshed. Every step was a battle. The cold was so sharp it hurt to breathe. Finally, they reached the shed. Garrett wrenched the door open. They fell inside, gasping. For a moment they just stood there, breathing hard, covered in snow. Then Martha started laughing. It wasn't funny. Nothing about this was funny. But she couldn't stop. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was the absurdity of almost dying for firewood. Garrett looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Then he started laughing too. They laughed until tears streamed down their faces, until their sides ached, until the fear finally loosened its grip. "You're crazy," Garrett said, still grinning. "You followed me," Martha shot back, fair point. They loaded their arms with wood and made the brutal journey back. When they stumbled through the kitchen door, half frozen and covered in snow, the men cheered. That night, after everyone had eaten and the fire was roaring again, Garrett found Martha sitting alone by the stove. He didn't say anything, just draped a thick wool blanket over her shoulders. His hand lingered for just a moment, just long enough for Martha to feel the warmth of it. "The weight?" Then he stepped away. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, started to leave, then stopped. "Martha." She looked up. "What you did today, that was brave. Stupid, but brave." She smiled despite herself. Garrett's expression softened. "I meant what I said before. About you keeping people warm. You do. You keep all of us warm." He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. "Especially me." Then he was gone. Martha sat there, wrapped in the blanket that smelled like cedar and smoke, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not hope. Not anymore. Something bigger. Something terrifying. She was falling in love with Garrett Stone. The realization hit her like the blizzard. Swift, violent, undeniable. She loved the way he washed dishes without complaint, the way he defended her to his men, the way he looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth protecting, worth keeping. She loved his quiet strength, his rough hands, his rare smiles that felt like gifts. But love was dangerous. Love had failed her before. Love had brought her to that train platform where a man took one look and decided she wasn't enough. Martha pulled the blanket tighter and stared into the fire. Maybe Garrett was different. Maybe he really did see her. Not just her body, not just her cooking, but her. Or maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe this was just gratitude, proximity, loneliness disguised as something more. She didn't know. All she knew was that her heart was beating faster. Her hands were shaking, and when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Garrett's face. The storm finally broke on the fourth day. The sun came out pale and weak, but there. The men emerged from the bunkhouse like prisoners released. They cheered, threw snowballs, acted like fools. Martha stood in the doorway and watched them, these rough, hard men who'd become something like family. Garrett stood apart from the others near the barn, looking out at the damaged fences and drifted snow. Martha walked over to him slowly. "Bad?" she asked. "Could be worse." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Garrett said, without looking at her, "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." He finally turned to face her. His eyes were serious, searching. "I mean it, Martha. I'm glad you're here. This place, these men, me. We're better because of you." Martha's breath caught. "You make us better," he continued. "You make me better." He reached out slowly, carefully, like he was afraid she'd pull away, and he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, just for a heartbeat. Then he dropped his hand and stepped back. "Better get to work," he said quietly. And he walked away. Martha stood there in the snow, heart pounding, face burning despite the cold. And she knew with absolute certainty, Garrett Stone felt it too. Spring came slowly to Wyoming. The snow pulled back inch by stubborn inch, revealing brown grass and mud, and the bones of things that hadn't survived the winter. But it also brought wildflowers, purple and yellow and white, dotting the plains like promises. Martha had been at the ranch for 4 months now. 4 months of early mornings and late nights. 4 months of feeding men and mending clothes and slowly, carefully, building something that felt like home. But the town hadn't forgotten about her. The whispers started small. Travelers passing through, cowhands from other ranches, word traveled fast in the territory, and the story of the fat mail-order bride cooking at Grady Ranch made for good gossip. "Did you hear about Stone's cook? She's the one Thomas Carver rejected at the station." "Can you imagine? Poor bastard must be desperate. I heard she's got her claws in him good, probably using more than salt in her cooking, if you know what I mean." The laughter that followed those words was worse than the words themselves. Martha heard it all. In town at the Mercantile. Outside the church, she didn't attend anymore because the stares hurt more than the loneliness. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on her work. But the poison seeped in anyway, working its way under her skin like splinters. Then Caroline came back. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon in a fine carriage, wearing a green velvet dress and a smile sharp as cut glass. Her dark hair was pinned high. Her skin was pale and perfect. She looked like everything Martha wasn't. Garrett was in the yard when Caroline stepped down from the carriage. Martha watched from the kitchen window, hands frozen on the bowl she'd been stirring. "Garrett," Caroline called sweetly. "It's been too long." He didn't smile, didn't move toward her, just stood there, arms crossed. "What do you want, Caroline? Is that any way to greet an old friend?" "We're not friends." Caroline's smile never wavered. She glanced around the ranch, taking in the repaired fences, the healthy cattle, the clean buildings. "I heard you've been doing well, better than when I left. That's because the people here don't quit when things get hard." Caroline's eyes flashed, but she kept her composure. Then her gaze landed on the kitchen window, on Martha, and her smile widened. She walked straight toward the kitchen. Garrett followed, jaw tight. Martha stepped back from the window, heart hammering. She wiped her hands on her apron, tried to steady her breathing. The door swung open. Caroline swept in like she owned the place. She looked around the kitchen with barely concealed disdain. Then her eyes settled on Martha. "So this is who you settled for," Caroline said loudly. Loud enough for the men working outside to hear. She circled Martha slowly, like a predator sizing up wounded prey. "I suppose when a man's pride breaks, he reaches for comfort food." Laughter drifted in from outside. Martha didn't know if it was at her. Didn't matter. It felt like it. "You know what they call you in town?" Caroline continued, voice dripping with false sympathy. "The hog with the hearth. A pig in an apron. Isn't that clever?" Martha's face burned. her hands clenched at her sides. Every insult she'd ever endured came rushing back. Every joke, every pitying look, every moment she'd been made to feel less than human. She turned away, started toward the back door. "I should go," Martha whispered, voice breaking. "This isn't worth all this mess." Caroline's laughter followed her. "See, Garrett, even she knows." But Garrett wasn't laughing. His face had gone dark. "Dangerous. Get out," he said quietly. Caroline blinked. "What, get out, Garrett, darling? I was just—" He stepped forward. His voice was still quiet, but it carried weight like thunder. "You left me because I didn't have enough money. You walked away when I needed someone most. And now you come back here into my home and mock the woman who stayed when you ran." Caroline's smile finally cracked. Garrett turned and walked out the door, out into the yard where half his men had gathered, pretending to work but really listening. He stopped in the center of the yard, raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Caroline," he called, "you left me because I didn't have enough money. Edith stayed because she has enough heart." The men fell silent. "Any man here who mocks the woman who's fed him through winter, nursed him through sickness, and worked herself half to death to keep this ranch running," he continued, "can find a new place to work." Today, no one spoke. No one moved. Garrett's eyes swept across his men. Then he looked back toward the kitchen where Martha stood frozen in the doorway. He walked toward her, slowly, deliberately. The whole ranch watched. He stopped in front of her, took off his hat, the gesture old West men reserved for the deepest respect. "You want to go, Martha?" he said softly. "I won't stop you. But if you stay knowing I choose you." His voice grew stronger, not out of pity, not because of what you cook, but because you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen the man I could be, instead of the man I was. Martha's vision blurred. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Garrett reached out and took her hand. "I'm asking you to stay," he said, "as more than a cook, as my partner, my equal." He paused, "as my wife. If you'll have me." The world stopped. Martha stared at him, at this hard, proud man kneeling in the mud in front of everyone, offering her everything she'd been told she'd never have. Behind them, Caroline made a disgusted sound and climbed back into her carriage. No one watched her leave. They were all watching Martha. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." Garrett's face broke into a smile. Real and wide and beautiful, he stood, pulled her close, and kissed her in front of God and 20 cowboys and the wide Wyoming sky. The men erupted in cheers. 6 weeks later, they married in the ranch yard under a canopy of wildflowers. Martha wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Garrett wore his Sunday best. Every ranch hand attended, cleaned up, reverent, proud to witness it. The ceremony was short. The vows were simple, but when Garrett said "I do," he meant it with everything he had. And when Martha said "I do," she finally believed that someone could love her, not despite who she was, but because of it. The wedding feast was legendary. Roasted beef, fresh bread, apple pie with cinnamon that made grown men weep. And at the center of it all, Martha and Garrett sitting side by side, his hand covering hers. That night, after the guests had gone and the stars had come out, Garrett found Martha washing the last of the dishes. He picked up a towel without a word. She smiled. "You don't have to, I know," he said, "but I want to." They worked in comfortable silence, washing, drying, moving around each other with the ease of people who'd found their rhythm. When the last dish was done, Garrett pulled Martha close. "I meant what I said," he murmured against her hair. "You make me better. Every day, you make me brave," she whispered back. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding each other, while outside the wind whispered across the plains and the stars wheeled overhead. 5 years later, the ranch had grown. So had their family. 2 children now, a boy and a girl, both learning to cook at their mother's knee. Martha's kitchen had become famous across the territory. People rode for miles just to taste her cooking. She'd started teaching other women, sharing recipes, building community, and every single night, without fail, Garrett washed the dishes. One evening, Martha found a letter waiting for her, from a young woman in a neighboring town, a girl who'd written, asking how she could ever be loved if boys only laughed at her size. Martha sat down at the table, dipped her pen, and began to write. Dear friend, I used to believe the same thing. I thought love only came for the slim, the beautiful, the perfect. I thought I had to wait for someone to choose me before I could belong. But I learned something. You don't wait for love to find you. You become love. You pour it into your work, your kindness, your stubborn hope. You feed the world with your fire. And maybe, just maybe, someone worthy will smell the warmth in your kitchen and decide to stay. She paused, then added one last line. Don't wait to be chosen, sweetheart. Choose yourself first. And if you're lucky, someone good will choose you too. Martha folded the letter, sealed it, and stepped outside. Above her, the stars blazed across the endless sky. Behind her, lamplight glowed warm from the windows. Inside, she could hear Garrett reading to the children, his voice low and gentle. This was her life now, not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd dreamed of on that train. Something better, something real, something earned through flour and fire and the quiet, steady courage of showing up every single day. Martha Brennan had been told her whole life that she wasn't enough. But standing there under the Wyoming stars, with love behind her and sky above her and purpose in her bones, she finally knew the truth. She'd always been enough. She just needed to find someone brave enough to see it. If this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you that love doesn't follow rules or appearances or what the world says you deserve, then this is your sign to believe again. Because somewhere out there, someone is still choosing kindness over cruelty, still believing in slow, steady love, still stirring the pot for more than just flavor, but for home. If you felt the warmth of Martha's courage and Garrett's quiet devotion, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a story. Because here at Wild West Love Stories, we tell tales where bullets missed but hearts didn't, where the overlooked became unforgettable, where love was earned, not given. New stories every week of courage, redemption, and love that defied the odds. Subscribe now, turn on that bell, and ride with us into the heart of the untamed we.